Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We are on page 1241. Yesterday we learned the conclusion of the subject matter of Zivug Shalom, the complete union, or the perfect union, and that is when Abba ve'Ima, Chochma and Binah, and spell it out, the contemplation of the divine, but one that you become completely absorbed in it. And furthermore, more than just being absorbed, you're gazing at the metzach of Arechampin, like seeing God, godliness in its purest form, the determination, even though it may not be understood, because it's only because the tam is concealed on the deepest level, is completely beyond us, but you do see God's will, and that's informing Chochma and Binah because it's gazing at metzach of Arechampin. That metzach is ha'aras panim, it's the reflection of a face, which, as he said, carries a er atzmi, as we learned. Chilis er atzmi, which draws the 370, the shin ayin nehirin, the lights and energies from Pnimius Atik, das of Atik, that carries the shin and the ayin, as we explained, the shin, the Chabad, and the 7 midas of Atik. And that creates the Zivug Shalom, the perfect union, the complete Yichud Pnimi, which in turn, Shenimshach B'zeh, and that is drawn Er Chodosh, Mamish Mebchinas Pnimius Atik, a virtually new energy from Pnimius Atik, all the way to Pnimius Atzmus Ein Sof, like I pointed out, like he said at the bottom of page 1236 from the Kutei Torah, the beer in Ugdashti, and then Oz Gam Bezun, and then also Zah and Malchus, their union, which is a Yichud Pnimi, which is called Zivug Gufni, a physical union, which is the Oz Gam Bezun will be B'chinas Yichud Pnimi. Then Zun is also, in other words, it draws down that also the unions on the lower levels in Zah and Malchus are Yichud Pnimi, an internal and complete union, which is which is a Zivug Gufni, which creates Shahu Hamshacha Atzmis. As I explained yesterday about the creation of something new, whether it's a child or anything that becomes a new entity, but it's Hamshacha Atzmis, it's not a reflection. But now he's going to contrast it with a Zivug that's not Shalom, that's not complete. So we get the whole picture here. That's what we're going to learn now. So I'm continuing on the 7th line from the top of page 1241. And this can be found at ayinbeis.com, these pages. Omnam, b'chinu zivuga deloy shalim. Chaim, in contrast, a zivug that's not complete, a joining or a union or fusion that's not complete, isa be'etz chaim sham. It says in Eitz Chaim there, and that there is cited on top of page 1237, Shar HaZivugim Perik Beis, where he speaks about zivug shalom we just discussed, the complete or perfect or total union. So he explains in Eitz Chaim, he says in Eitz Chaim, a zivug that's not complete. So it says, Shezeu kasher Binah eina b'shleimus kemosa. That's when Binah is not in the complete state of its complete state of stature. Kemosa means like its height. Which means that we're not experiencing the Atzmi as the core of Binah. So if you recall, at the bottom of page, just to put it into context, he said two things. That a Yichud Pnimi, I'm looking on page 1236, 1 second. I definitely suggest you look there because this is continuing from what he said there. But 1 second. Yeah, Shivug Shalom, he said, is when Chochma and Binah, Ashavin became Masam. They're equal in stature. In other words, Binah too is absorbing a higher experience. Remember, we learned that Binah on its own, in contrast to Chochma, is more of a yesh. It's I understand. You feel it, you experience it, you can talk about it. Chochma is absorbing a higher reality, and you're absorbed in it. So there's no hergish, there's no feeling. When Binah and Chochma are both in that absorbing stage, that's called a zivug shalom. They're both experiencing something greater. But when Binah and Chochma are not equal in that sense, because Binah is understanding, developing the idea that was conceived in Chochma, then it's a zivug that's not complete. That's like the first stage when we use our minds. You come up with an idea, Binah develops it, but Binah is not yet completely absorbed in that higher reality as Chochma is. Then there's a stage where Binah is absorbed. So this is what he's discussing now. He's saying a zivug that's not complete is when Binah is not on that level. It's focused more on the intelligence and the comprehension of the idea, not necessarily the truth of the idea, the resonating truth. Remember, the goal of Binah is not to take us away from the deeper, higher truth. It's to integrate it and internalize it. But as soon as you're internalizing something, it's always coming at the expense of moving away from the very core reality of it. Let me explain this a little more in the difference between seeing something and hearing something. When you see a beautiful sight, let's say a natural, beautiful wonder, or you see a beautiful painting, when you see it, which is usually Chochma, that experience captivates you, mesmerizes you, and you can be completely absorbed in it. But this doesn't mean you understand it. It just means you're just seeing something that is lifting you up and transporting you to another time and place, so to speak, and that's that. Afterwards, when you share this experience with somebody who did not see it, you explain it to them. You say, here's what I saw, and so on. Someone that hears the story is not like someone who experienced the story. But on the other hand, hearing the story makes it easier for us to relate to. Because when you see it, you're lifted, you're going out of your identity to experience something greater than you are. When you're hearing it and understanding it, it's much more internalized. So the upside is that it's much more pneumius. On the downside, it's not as pure and pristine as it is when you see it. Now, the real goal is to have both. But initially, it always begins that we conceive of an idea, Binah develops it. Once it's developed, yes, you want it to stay on the reservation. So Chochma is the reality check to make sure Binah doesn't just completely wander off. But Binah is more of the Shmiya level. I'm understanding it, the details, I learn it. Let's say you learn a piece of Gemara or even a piece of Chassidus. You're understanding it. But are you appreciating that pure elokus in it? Not necessarily. Then comes another stage where you go into Pnimius Binah or Atzmius Binah, as he puts it here, where Binah is in its fullest sense, and Binah, that even the understanding, which in a way has moved you away from the Etzem to understand it, it's moved you away from Chochma, but then Binah and Chochma come together, where Binah now comes to a deep understanding, can come back and say the resonating truth that I experienced when I saw it is now I also understand, and the understanding is not in any way compromising or concealing that resonating truth. So Binah now brings it back to that full picture. So you have Binah and Chochma equal now. They're both gazing at the Metzach of Arich, which in turn is drawing from the energies of Pnimius Atik. But when Binah is still in an earlier stage, meaning it's more I'm understanding it, but I'm not yet fully, let's call it resonating, its truths are resonating through Binah. Chochma has that experience without Binah, but you want the Chochma to come into the Binah. Basically, you want the etzem to come begili. So Chochma is more atzmi, Binah is more gili. But then you want the gili to become an atzmi, that the giluim should also be uplifted. So even when you're on the level of comprehension and it's internalized and it's expanded upon in Binah, there's the stage where Binah is still, like what he calls here, Eina b'shleimus kemosa. It's not the atzmius. And then there's how Binah comes into the level of the atzmius. There's more, he's going to say more, but I just wanted to explain it so we understand it in the fullest sense of the word. So again, you tell someone a story, they hear it, they understand it, it's more on their terms. It's not like they saw it, but you want them to ultimately see that which they heard. Like in a sense, by Matan Torah, they saw the sights, they saw the sounds, and they heard the sights. Combination of Shmiya and Riyah all coming together. Chochma and Binah joining. But that is clearly a much higher level of than the initial level where Binah Binah is still on its own in its own place. So in a sense, in the growth of Mutfa, Murgish, Muskel, the Muskel you start with Binah, you move to Chochma, then you come to Chochma, Binah joining together, experiencing this higher Metzach of Arich, and then the Zivug Shalom, then the Ur Chodesh that comes, that's when the Ur Chodesh comes in the fullest sense of the word. Okay, so let me continue reading. This is all explaining this. So he says, so what do you have? Ki'im hi b'bchinas ima rivia al binyan b'seid va'im revetzes al afrechim.
Al benin.
Al banin, right? Al banin, right? So there's the concept. Let me go back. This is from Parshat Kiseitze. This is when you talk about va'im revetzes al afrechim is when a chicken or a bird is sitting upon her what do you say, afrechim? Her fledglings, her chicks, newborns. So in Aramaic, and also in the levels of, so what is that in the Dagi? Ima is Binah, Revia, like Revetzes, Revia Albanin, it is resting upon and like incubating its children. Besod Em Revetzes ala Afrechim. How do you translate Afrechim? Fledglings, or you translate chicks? Afrechim. How do you translate Afrechim in English? Let me just see. How do they translate Afrechim? I just want to see the translations. Just give me a minute. Yeah, chicks. Okay. So you see, when a mother is she's protecting and warming her children. So in Ruchnius, Binah is warming her midas, basically, her bonin. He's going to explain. So that's a level of Binah Revi al bonin. So Binah is like serving as a mother for the lower levels of the midas. When Binah is in that state where it is in its role as mother, of incubating, of warming, and so on, and protecting its young, in this case, Binah on the bonim, which is the midas, then it's not being makabel from the core of Abba Chochma. Ke'enim shavim b'kemosan. Because they're not equal in stature. It's the mother is being involved with her children. V'hirak neged tanhi da Abba. Then Binah is only keneged, tanhi is teferes netzach yisayid of Abba. So let me explain what that means. That's a Kabbalistic statement. So remember, Chochma has 10 spheres, Binah has 10 spheres. When Binah and Chochma are equal stature, ponim b'ponim, and they're joining together in a union, and not they're doing different functions, so then the 10 spheres of Binah and the 10 spheres of Chochma unite. When Binah is in the role of being so-called focusing on its offspring. And that's an important role. No one's denying it. But then the main connection with Chochma is more on the lower levels, where it is the Teferes Netzach Yisayid, which means the lower levels of Abba, not the higher spheres of Abba. Now, why does he skip Chesed and Gvura? Oh, no, he skips, that's not Chesed Gvura. Teferes, Netzach Ched Yesed, the four after Chesed Gvura. Chesed Gvura belongs to the higher five. So in other words, it begins with the Teferes, Netzach Ched Yesed of Abba. Why doesn't it have Malchus in it? Because probably Malchus is the Binah, Malchus of Abba is Binah. Maybe, I don't know. But it says Tanhid Abba. So that's the stage. So Binah has like two roles. There's a role when it's standing and it's not equal stature with Chochma, like I said, in understanding and comprehending and relating, giving birth to the Midas and watching and protecting over them. And then when it's in that state where it's not Zivuk Shalom, the Ein Abba ve'Ima Mekablim Oz B'Chinas Shin Ayin Oher in the Mitzchad Arich. And when Binah is not on that equal stature with Chochma and is not being receiving from Etzem of Abba of Chochma, then Chochma and Binah are not receiving the 370 lights of the forehead of Arich, of Metzach the Arich. This is all from the Zoyar, all from the Eitz Chaim, Shara Zivugim. This is all explained there. So Rebbe Rashab is using this to contrast the two different levels of union. So it's not finished yet. It continues. Umavur Sham in the parentheses, and it's explained there in Eitz Chaim. We're all back to the same Eitz Chaim that began on page 1237. Eitz Chaim Shara Zivugim, the different types of unions. So he says, explained there the Oz, Abba ve'Ima mistaklim b'chinas ponim da'arich. When the union is not complete, and Binah is connecting more to the lower levels of Abba, but not the core of Chochma, then they are also gazing at Arich, but not at the forehead, at the face of Arich. That's what it says there. So this seems to pose a question. Because Uli'il, Dibra Maskal Zeischu Kasanal, the mimer he cited at the bottom of last page, we learned that what? That this boy, it was explained the Aris Panim B'chinas Eratzmi, that the reflection of the face is an Eratzmi. It's true, the Metzach is the root of it all, like he said, but we learned there that so if Abba ve'Ima, even though they're not complete union, they're also gazing at the face of Arich, it's called an Eratzmi based on the mimer we learned earlier. So the Rebbe Rashab responds and explains, the Tzarech Leimer, the Shama Kavona ala gilu de train tapuchim shu tikun hazayin haponim mesairis. Mashakosov Khan, let me just read it before I explain. Mashakosov Khan beitz chayim shemekam haponim anu b'chinas hasairis and mashayirin kem mazal chesed v'zgemo in lachem haponim v'yayechem shemekam shel chayis Okay. So here's how the Rebbe Rashab is reconciling these two statements. Based on the Eitz Chaim, we just said, the lower level where the Zivug is not complete, Abba ve'Ima are gazing at the face. And when it's a Zivug Shalom, they're gazing at the forehead. In the Maimer Zeis Chukas, he said gazing at the face is Eratzmi. We now said that Binah is not Atzmi when it's on this lower level. So he says you have to say that Sham, meaning in the Maimer of Zeis Chukas, the Kavana, the intention is, he's referring to the Gili of Trein Tapuchin. Okay, Tapuchin means apples. I know, it sounds strange. We're talking about a forehead, a face, apples. But in Kabbalah, Tapuchin Kadishin, Chakal Tapuchin Kadishin, which means the Chakal Tapuchin Kadishin is the field where the orchard of apple trees. But it says Tapuchin Kadishin, holy apples. Tapuach, just like it is with other physical things, is really a revelation of a very high spiritual level in Arich. Actually, the mimer of the Mittler Rebbe and the Tzemach Tzedek mention it, I believe. So he's saying that the Trein Tapuchin, which is referring to the face, and I have to look up why, he says that's the Tikkun Hazayin Haponim Mesairis. So in the Yud Gimel Tikkunim, Tikkuni Dikna, the Yud Gimel Tikkuni the Yud Gimel Midas Arachimim, the Tikkun HaZayin is Ponim Mesiris, but he said that before is the level of the forehead that doesn't have hair on it. So I'll explain. Let me just read the whole thing, explain it as I read it. What it says here in Eitz Chaim, that Abba V'Ima is looking at the face, he says, Shemakablim Mahaponim Hainu B'chinas HaSayris. So he's distinguishing that which we learned earlier in Zois Chukas, the Maimer, he's actually talking about a higher level. And that's why it's called Eratzmi, a higher level that relates to the Metzach. And the Eitz Chaim, when the Eitz Chaim says the face, he's not talking about the forehead, he's talking about the lower part of the face, with his hair, with his beard. That is become Aponim Hainu B'chinas HaSayris. As I explained yesterday, why is the Metzach free of hair? Because it's a direct channel, even though it's concealment of the das, but it doesn't have any filter. Here is a hamshacha that comes through like thin wiring, so to speak. So the distinction he's making is that the Eitz Chaim, when it says ponim, he means the lower part of the face, which travels through the hair. And the Maimer Zeis Chukas is talking about the upper part of the head, which is the Metzach, and that's why he's saying Atzmi. So it's reconciled, because the Eitz Chaim also says that the Zivug Shalom is when you look at the Metzach. So he's basically saying the face of the Eitz Chaim is talking about a lower dimension than the face in the Maimer that's talking about the higher forehead. Now, what's Sidus? Hainu Masheyenkim Mazel Haches Vayud Gimel. So there's the Tikkun HaZayin, there's the Mazel line. There are 13 tikkunim, 13 so-called channels, or 13 ornaments, or different words for it. So number 7 relates to the Metzach, which is Ponim Mesiris. Whereas the lower part of the face relates to Zayenkim, they nurse, which means a very thin flow, like through a hair, like a wire, very thin wire. The Mazel Haches Vayud Gimel. That comes from the Mazel, the 8th and the 13th, not the 7th. It's not here, I'm not going to go into all of it, but each one of the 13 attributes, each one of them has their own part of Hamshachet. 7 is a much higher Hamshachet, and the 8 and 13 is much more a more narrow flow. Suffice it to say that. And then one more thing the Rebbe Rasha brings to, very brief, but I'll explain it. Look in Zayar Truma 155a. Be'inyan lechem haponim u'bemigdash melech sham. That's a commentary on the Zohar, where he talks about the lechem haponim. Now, lechem haponim, why is it called ponim? You know, we call it in English, we call it the loaves of the shulchan, the lechem haponim.
The showbread. The showbread.
Right, the showbread. Why is it called ponim? So ponim literally means the face of it. When you say showbread, means it's like it's being not shown off, but the lechem haponim. But Chassidus explains why it's called ponim, because it's a reflection. That's why it was fresh all week long, because it has hamshacha from the inner dimension of the ruchnius of what the lechem haponim represents. So he's saying this ponim, the adua, the yichud the shulchan, the yichud of the shulchan where you had the lechem haponim, is a lower yichud. Who shall it say the chayes ha'elamis? It's a yichud with the chayes ha'elamis. That's why it was bread. Bread offers sustenance. Sustenance is already a level that's that's relating to the thing it's sustaining. So, for example, the yichud of the keteris of the mizbeach, or even the yichud of the shulchan, that's a deeper primisdika level, because there's nothing there that anyone benefits from. I mean, it gives off light, and it's the incense. But the shulchan gave off the bread which was eaten. It's connected to Amshachas Chayes Ha'elamis. That's what it is in Ruchnis. V'hu b'chinas se'era. Se'era is the yeast. So se'era, it looks to me like he's connecting se'era with saira. In other words, it's a flow that's more minimal. Ukameshakoseh b'mokem acher. Se'er is the yeast, not the yeast. What do you say, se'er? V'kol se'er lo yechol. Yeah.
It doesn't sound right. Se'era with the ayin.
I'm saying it seems like I can't say for sure, but because he brings around, maybe not. Because why would he say who b'chinas se'era? Why is that negay here? Okay.
Maybe it's she'ero ksuso ve'inoso.
Right,
She'ero
like
is food.
sustenance.
The
Yeah.
pnimius. Ksuso is the chitzonius.
No. He's not talking. He's talking about chitzenius here for sure.
So he says
Because he's
she'ero.
Se'era is food, maybe. Se'era is
se'era is
food.
food. Yeah, that's what he probably means. Se'era as in sustenance. Chayes se'elamis. Anyway, what's the point he's making here? That you see that you can use ponim in different ways. The ponim that he talks about in Maimazes Chukas that reflects the atzmi, like he said on top of the page, others ponim that comes from the atzmis of the nefesh. Like he said, Shinan is the mitzvah he mokir ha'oris haponim. That's a deeper level. That's atzmi. But the yichud of zivug that's not shalom, where Binah is only connected to Chochma on a lower level, and Binah is like a mother, which he's going to explain now, that tends to her children. That is the level in Eitz Chaim that he says that it's only gazing at the face, but as the face relates to the lower levels, which means like the Cyrus, and that he compares that. So the Lechem HaPonim is a proof to that, because it's called Ponim, and yet it's connecting to Chayis La'elamis. It's not connecting to the Atzmi, it's connecting to a transmission to that which is lower than it. You'll understand it right now after the parentheses. He's going to explain. He says like this: the inyan ima de reveya albonin. This idea that ima reveya, which is revetzes, that is like covers and spreads over her children. Hainu b'chinas hamoichin hashayachim el hamidus. That's been a moichin intellect as it relates to the midas. Lias mizeh leidas hamidus. It says meichin, but it should say midas. The Oza Bina Nikra Ema Banim. That's when Bina is called the mother of the children. So it's not Bina as it goes back to its source and facing upward with Chochma, looking at the Metzach. It's Bina as it's relating to that, its offspring, which is the Midas. So it's a lower level, which, as we said, was the level of Bina as it relates more to, remember, Murgish, the Midas. Not muscle. Chochma was muscle, pure muscle, where the midas get elevated and you don't even feel them. They become absorbed in a higher presence. Bina is how the lower level of Bina is how Bina relates to the midas. And that's why it doesn't transform them. To transform a transformation of the midas, you have to go to the level of etzem of Chochma that goes to the metzach of Arich that draws the 370 energies. Now we're talking about Bina as it relates to Midas. Va'ikirhu b'bchinas chitzenius hameichin. And the primary element of meichin that relates to Midas is the chitzenius hameichin, the outer dimension. Shenizbar le'el shezeh b'chinas murgish mitzad hameichin. If you remember, this is what was explained earlier, the murgish mitzad hameichin, the emotional, the cognitive emotions, the emotions as the level of murgish as it's informed by the meichin. That was a lower level of meichin. Sha'ikir hu amidus. There, the primary force are the emotions, but the emotions are being guided by the cognitive. For who liis ispilus murgeshes bizgalus alev, as we learned there. That's as ispilus murgeshes, a palpable stimulation and arousal of the midas. Bizgalus alev, that's revealed. That's not as the midas are becoming sichlim and elevating and being absorbed in something higher. This is the midas as they are active emotions. However, they're being guided and refined and directed by Bina. This is called Bina as it relates to its children. The Eim HaRevetzes ala Efreichin, the mother that rests upon and spreads upon her offspring, her chicks. And what is the level of his bonus in this level of Bina? He's tying it back together what we've learned. He binyanim sheboim b'chinas islapshus v'tfisa mamish. The contemplation here is in matters that come in a way that you can contain it. Islapshus, it manifests, it's enclosed. V'tfisa mamish. Remember we said levushe hasoge. I'll refer you back what he's referring to right now in case you want to look it up. He's talking here the level on page, let me just see, page 1229 and on. And then again, 1229 and on is he's summing up what he's saying. So he's talking now the lower level. He's going back, comparing the zivugim, so it all comes together here. So he's saying, okay, they're commensurate to the level of the emotions that can relate to the subjective. Remember, emotions are more about the individual and our subjective interests. And it all comes in levushe hasoga, which means garments that we can relate to. Yeah, the bottom of page 1229. That's where it was discussed at length.
Are you going to stop for questions at some point?
When I finish, let me finish the subject matter, because I'm literally, it's middle of this discussion. So you guys like this, and through this creates, through this becomes his spilus hamidus b'murgish. As we learned back then, once you're contemplating on things that are palpable and relatable, so the emotions also are very palpable and they're very tangible, and you feel the experience. You're not being absorbed in something greater and higher. And that's when the moichin are concealed. Because the moichin are leading in the emotions, but the emotions are the dominant feature here. Yeah, I think I'll continue till the end of this paragraph. Ach, gam bechinas primis hameichin hanal, or maybe not. Let me just see what he says here. No, I can stop here because now he's going to go and he's going to explain. Okay, so this is chitzenius hameichin, connected more to Binah as it relates to lower levels of its midas, the emotions, what we called before the level of murgish mitzad haseichel, like he said, murgish mitzad hamoichin. In contrast to the highest level that he called before the tachlis gadlus hamidus, which he called before the tachlis gadlus hamidus. What did he call that? Agdolus tachlis agdolus the zah gadlus abba. When Chochma and Binah are both in the same stature and absorbed to something higher and drawing down from the forehead, gazing at the forehead and drawing down from Primius Atik, which that creates something completely new. What we're saying now is not new, but he's going to conclude about the Primius Hameichin. But he's tying everything we learned together here. There's one final piece, the Ach, but I'll stop here because it's another point, and it's so if anyone wants to ask anything, now is good.
Chochma, is Chochma reaching the mitzvah? I know that the Binah is not, but Chochma is reaching, or Chochma has to be shoving.
Hold on, no, you misunderstood the whole point here. The Eitz Chaim says that when is the Zivuk Sholem, when Chochma and Binah, Abba ve'Ima, are mistaklim b'mitzcha the arechampin, they're both gazing at arecham, the forehead, and from there they receive the shinai and the hayden from Atik. That's the Eitz Chaim. That's the highest level. When Binah too, as I explained at length, is at the same level with Chochma receiving from these higher levels. Then there's a zivug that's not complete. And that's when Binah is not on that level. So Binah is focused more on its contemplation, understanding, and relating to it, and giving birth to the emotions, and the focus is on the emotions, on the children. And then this Eitz Chaim says that Chochma and Binah at that point are looking at the ponim of Arich, the face of Arich, but not the metzach. That's more of an external level. The Chassidus that he said, through the hairs. That's what he said here.
My question,
What's your question, Abshleim? I'm not sure what your question is.
My question is, I understand everything. That Binah cannot only
It's two different states. There's with Chochma. What? He's not talking. A zivug needs Chochma and Binah. You don't have a zivug by Chochma by itself. Zivug means
it's not nimshach lemato, but how about Chochma itself?
Chochma doesn't. It's not a zivug. We're talking the zivug of Chochma and Binah has two levels. You're asking Chochma itself. We spoke earlier that Chochma on a lower level, but it's not a zivug shalom. It is a Chochma on a lower level experiences. He doesn't talk about what he just says. Primis Chochma. He said, if you go back to the Maimer, he says that Chochma, Primis Chochma, Gadlus Abba, reaches a level of being absorbed in something higher, and the midas become midas sichlim and not midas murgoshes. That's all he said about it. I don't know the relationship with Atik at that point. The Rebbe Rashab didn't talk about it. One second, let me just finish with him. One second. So Rebbe Rashab did not spell out the relationship with Atik, if I recall correctly. He spoke about Chochma, Primis HaChochma, where the midas are not murgoshes. That he said very clear, Einu murgoshim, Primis HaMechin, and that they're B'klal Einu murgosh b'chinas Metzias, because Chochma is Ayin and Binah is Yesh. Just looking quickly. And there it has the power to change the midas. That he did say. But then he said, in order to do it, you need another thing, the yichud of Chochma and Binah. It seems to me, Chochma alone does not have the complete power to create something new without Binah being together with it. Chochma is higher than Binah. Gadlus Abba is higher than Gadlus Ima. That's Shabbos, he said, Gadlus Abba, the ultimate level of muskel. But then you need something more. You need Binah to be together with Chochma to create this Chodosh Mamish from Atik. Shin Ayin Neherim. That's ultimately the highest. That's higher than, in other words, there's Binah, there's Chochma, and then there's Chochma and Binah together. That's the ultimate. Okay.
Rabbi Jacobson, sorry to interrupt. I was actually looking at the Eitz Chaim that you were talking about, the Parasha Ha'azinu, and what it was saying to me, I don't know if, correct me if I understood
Chaim
it
is
correct.
not a Parasha. Eitz Chaim is not Parasha Ha'azinu. Zohar is Parasha
Zohar, that's what I'm saying. Sorry, Zohar Parasha Ha'azinu. It was saying that it's at that level, not only Chachma is giving to Binah, but they're kind of receiving from one another, which typically it sounds like Chochma gives to Binah and then Binah gives to the Zohar. But in this level, they were saying that even Binah gives to Chochma. Is that a correct?
I don't know. If you're quoting something, I'd like to see it inside.
I'm going to dig it up and maybe Be'ezrat Hashem tomorrow, I'll let you know exactly where it is.
Well, so far he has not brought that here in Ayin Beis.
Okay.
But if you show it to me, I could then comment.
Okay.
my question is this level where there's not a zivug shalom between Chochma and Binah is instead whatever, sitting on the chicks, whatever, developing midos essentially. My question is this a situation where there's not complete bittul? In other words, the Chochma's ayin, the Binah's yesh, and in other words, is there sort of a more, slightly more tendency toward the self in this level, or if this is still a very, very high level where there's complete bittul, but there's something about Binah that's not focused enough on the whatever the Chochma or the whatever the focus of the above, somehow it's developing it. I guess the real question, the thrust of my question is
the question
occurring because of a lack of bittul?
I wouldn't put it in this context at all. When a mother takes care of her children, we don't say there's a lack of bittul. It's a different role. These are different roles. There's a role for having yesh. There's a reason Binah is a yesh, because you want to bring it into the structure of existence. Remember, the human being in the context of midas is a subjective human being. You want these subjective emotions to become mature, like we're learning, mutva, murgish, muslim. Binah is part of the maturity process of emotions growing from a less mature state to a more developed state. And that's a very important role to play. So I wouldn't put it in context. It's not a contest here, and competition between levels. This is the purpose of Binah in that state. That's important in that state. Then there's another level where Binah is in a zivuk sholem with Chochma, and then there's the state, as I said, being absorbed and reaching something greater. And yes, it's moving from yesh to ayin, but it's not about bittul so much. Obviously, the higher you go, the more bittul there is. But there's sometimes a role where you don't want to have that ultimate bittul because the mother would be neglecting the children if the mother's with the father all the time. So you have to have each one has its role. And he's discussing the different stages. In the process of Avodas Hashem, you grow from mudva, the natural behavioral, to murgish, the emotional, cognitive, emotional, as we're learning here, then the cognitive, then higher levels of cognitive, Binah to Chochma, to the yichud of Binah Chochma, which brings a chadash. But everything is necessary and everything has its place in life.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
I would suggest that maybe even when Binah's in the role of being the mother to the Midas, that's even a higher level yitzhak of bittul, as we can see with a mother and a husband. A mother is mesiras nefesh for her children, like Rachel for her children. That's
okay.
That's even a high. It seems like that might even be greater than her bittul to her husband, to her bittul to her children. Just naturally, a mother, Binah, has that aspect of it.
I think it's two different functions. Then there's a need for Binah to be one with her husband. In this case, Chochma and Binah, and they're connecting a metzach, connecting to something greater. I don't see it as a contradiction. If you're putting it into marital context, the fact that a mother takes care of her children and a father's doing what he has to do, that only complements when they're together intimately, and vice versa. It's not a competition. It should be both feeding each other. Their intimacy and zivuk shalom should be in turn translated to going back and taking care of the children better, and vice versa. Taking care of the children is not a competition. Some husbands feel they're competing with their children for their wife's attention. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about two different states, and both, yes, I agree. I mean, I am careful not to go there because he's not really discussing it this way. Here he's talking about zivuk shalom, zivuk not shalom. So zivuk not shalom sounds not complete because in context of connecting to higher levels, obviously that's where Chochma and Binah come together. In context of the lower levels of refining and taking care and what's it called, maturing the emotions, then that we're talking about the lower level. That's the context here. Yeah. Okay. So let me just try to finish the end of the paragraph, because it looks to me that the Rebbe Rashab is coming to a conclusion here. It's not over, but the Eitz Chaim and the Zoyar that he spoke about, and this whole idea of the elevation from Mutva, Murgish, Muskel, all the way to Chochma, Chochma and Binah, Chochma, then Binah and Chochma together, etc. Looks like he's coming to concluding that to some extent. So he gives one more final qualification. He says like this: Argam b'chinas pnimis hameichin hanal. Not just chesenis hameichin that we just spoke about, Binah as it relates to the emotions. It says also pnimis hameichin that we discussed earlier. That too, there's a level where the moichin are related to the midas. So he says, L'kutatera mates, the Maimer Enei Kail, it says the Mem Teshari Bina, the 49 gates of Bina, Hein Hashpos Habina Lies Seichel El Amida. That's the transmission or the Hashpah, the influence of Bina, to be an intelligence that radiates and shines toward the emotion. The Bechlal Zeh Yesh Leimer, the Rebbe Rashab is saying, included in this, we can say, is also Gam B'chinas Pnimius HaMeich. Even the Pnimius of Binah, basically, the Pnimius of Meichin of Binah. So he's qualifying something based on, it's really, this was said earlier just in different words, that when he's talking about Binah, even the panemius of it is also radiating toward the midas. However, the chitzenius HaMeichin is more about what's dominant are the feelings. Panemius HaMeichin is more, this is the maturity of the mind as they relate to the midas. So it's like a chitzenius HaMeichin, then we move to panemius HaMeichin, Binah, then you move to Chochma, then you move to the Zivug Shalom of Chochma and Binah. That's what it sounds like he's saying. Look at the Maimar of Osim Dvarei Beficha. That looks like volume 1. So I guess I have to look there to see what it says there. I don't remember. But Atzmis Binah, this is the 49 gates. And the core of Binah, Hu B'chinas Shar Hanun, the Binah. This is called the 50th gate of Binah. Hanikra Nesiv Lo Yedu, Ayit, the path that's not known, meaning it's a higher level. The Sham Hamshachim B'chinas Primis V'Atzmis HaChochma. That's already the Zivug Shalom. Okay. There, the Hamshach is from the inner and core level of Chochma. So basically, he's stating 3 levels in Binah. Chitzenius of Binah, where the midas, it's informing the midas, but the midas are prominent. Panemius Meichin of Binah, where the Meichin is even a deeper level, but it's still the 49 gates. It still relates to the midas, so it's a higher level. And then there's Habina, the 50th gate of Binah. There, the Hamshach comes from the inner and core of Chochma, which sounds very much like that's where it's already, because he said that's already Zivug Shalom, where you have the core of Chochma, Kabbalas Mechinas Atzmius Abba. Not as Binah relates to the Efrechim, to the chicks, to the children, but as Binah and Chochma join together and gaze at the Metzach, the forehead of Arich, and draw down the energies of Pnimius Atik, the new energies. Actually, you know something very interesting. If you want to think about it in terms of husband and wife, when a husband and wife are together in the fullest sense of the word, they can give birth to a new child. When a mother's taking care of her children, she's not giving birth to a new child. She's helping cultivate and nurture the growth of the existing children. So it's very much what we're fitting to what we said before. That Binah, as it relates to Midas, is more the development of these Midas, maturing them, refining them, elevating them, guiding them, directing them, protecting them. And then there's Binah, when it connects back with Chochma, the deepest level, then it has the power to give birth to a new child, and then in turn has to nurture that new child as well. So just to fill it in, fits very well to what we discussed. Okay. So we conclude the paragraph on page 1241. I'm going to stop here, but the floor is yours.
He said that about She'elo could be that She'elo is the Mezainas, this is the Zivugo, the Loi Shalim, and Einoso is the Zivugo Shlim.
It could be. Einoso is more like Kodesh Kadoshim, the Aron, V'ne'adati l'choshama. It could be. We'd have to look what the Mokem Acher is. The Shulchan is definitely, the Hashpah is going outward. Lechem, Se'era. And you're right, Einoso could be the Zivug Shalom of the, that works. And you know what? As if I recall correctly, Se'era Ksusa Ve'Einosa, Se'era is Shulchan, Ksusa I think is the Menorah, and I think Einosa is the Mizbeach HaPnimi. I'm almost sure that it says that, or something like that. I have to look it up. It
makes sense that Einosa is the Menorah, because Menorah is, Shulchan is Yashir.
No, Shulchan is Se'era for sure. He says that. But
no, Menorah is Oisher. So
anyway, you know, let's not guess. We got to look it up. I'm almost sure the Menorah is Ksusa, and Einosa is the Mizbeach HaPrim, Mizbeach HaKteres. But let me look it up.
Jacobson, does this seem to indicate to me, maybe I don't have it understand it completely, but obviously or properly, that the this Zivug Shalom that we're speaking about, this incredible level of zivug shalom, does that mean that if it's done properly, you have access to Shar Nun? Because it's my understanding that Shar Nun is something that's not accessible to an ordinary human being. But is this possible with the proper zivug shalom to access Shar Nun?
Well, are you talking about a zivug shalom of a husband and wife, or zivug shalom of Chochma and Binah of Atzilus?
Chochma, both, I guess, but primarily the giving birth and on a physical level. Would you just say maybe bringing down something that's infinite capability?
Well, the truth is, he's not really talking on the human level here. We're discussing it because we're trying to relate to it. Generally speaking, Pnimius Atik is even more off limits than Shar Hanun. So why don't you ask me about Pnimius Atik that he says you draw through the Zivug Shalom? If you can draw Pnimius Atik, you can definitely access Shar Hanun.
Wow.
So the answer is, like in anything, it's all relative. You're getting a taste of it. I mean, the Zivug Shalom that he's talking about here is a level that you could say, in the fullest sense of the word, will be L'Asid Loveh when Mashiach comes. But that doesn't mean there aren't periods when you have it. He doesn't really discuss when the Zivug is Shalom. He did discuss Raivid the Raivin, which is the level of Atik. Now, we know that Atik radiates every third meal on Shabbos.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we say that all the Giluyim is Manazeh from Chitzenius Atik, and the L'Asid Loveh will be Pnimius Atik. The answer is, it's a taste of it. We have a taste of it. So it's not the full-blown level. You know, Moshe Rabbeinu gained the 50th gate only when he went up on Har Nevoy at the end of his life. So in the fullest sense of the word, you're talking L'Asid Loveh, when the highest levels will be revealed. On a more Zohar Ampin level, which means more on a microcosmic level, we have a taste of it. I can't say, you know, that's how I would explain it.
So, sort of like a taste of the foods Erev Shabbos, that you're entitled to a taste of it.
Okay.
Whereas,
Yeah.
and when Shabbos Shayom Shkula Shabbos Menucha L'Chaim mean. Maybe that's okay. I got you. That's beautiful.
Okay, so we'll stop here at the end of the paragraph, page